You are standing in a field 10,000 years ago. You are hungry. You have been hungry for most of your life. In front of you is a deer. It is beautiful. It is fast. It weighs 200 pounds of pure meat. And you are thinking, why not just keep one? Seems obvious, right? Cows are just big grass eaters. Sheep are just fluffy grass eaters. A deer is basically both of those things. It eats grass. It is everywhere. It breeds every year. It was the most hunted animal on the planet for thousands of years. And yet no civilization in human history ever successfully domesticated a deer. Not once. Not the Greeks, not the Romans, not the Chinese, not the Native Americans who lived alongside white-tailed deer for 15,000 years. Nobody. And the more you dig into why, the more you realize this isn't just a question about animals. It's a question about you. It's about the invisible checklist your ancestors used to decide what got to survive alongside humans. And what got left behind forever. Stay until the end, because the last part reveals a rule so strange and specific that it explains not just deer, but almost every choice humanity has ever made. Let's go back to the beginning. Around 12,000 years ago, humans started doing something that had never happened on Earth before. They started controlling other animals. Not just hunting them, controlling them, keeping them alive on purpose, feeding them, breeding them. This was the agricultural revolution, and it changed everything. But here's what almost nobody thinks about. Out of the millions of animal species on this planet, humans only ever successfully domesticated around 15 mammals for farming. 15. That's it. Cows, pigs, sheep, goats, horses, donkeys, camels, llamas, alpacas, reindeer, water buffalo, yaks, Bali cattle, mithan, and the now extinct wild ancestors of a few more. 15 species across all of human history. And the vast majority of those 15 were locked in just one region, Eurasia. Why so few? Why not deer? Why not zebras? Why not the hundreds of other large grass-eating animals that were everywhere? This is where it gets interesting. In 1997, a scientist named Jared Diamond published a book called Guns, Germs and Steel. And inside it, he described something he called the Anna Karenina Principle. He borrowed it from the opening line of Tolstoy's famous novel. The line goes, "All happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." Diamond said the same thing is true for domestication. All successfully domesticated animals share the same small list of traits, but every animal that failed to be domesticated failed for its own specific individual reason. And deer, it turns out, failed for almost every reason on the list. Here's the first one: diet. To be worth domesticating, an animal needs to be cheap to feed. A cow eats grass. Grass is free. It grows everywhere. You don't have to do anything to make grass. Now think about what it would take to keep a deer alive in a pen. Deer are browsers. They don't just eat grass. They eat shoots, leaves, bark, berries, mushrooms, and dozens of specific plant types, depending on the season. Replicating that diet in captivity is a nightmare. You can't just throw hay at a deer and walk away. Early farmers didn't have the resources or the knowledge to keep a deer's gut healthy in confinement. The deer would get sick. The deer would die. And you'd have wasted 6 months of food and effort on nothing. But that's only the beginning. Even if you solved the diet problem, you'd run straight into the second wall: growth rate. To be worth farming, an animal has to grow fast enough to feed you before you starve waiting. Cows reach slaughter weight in about 18 months. Pigs in 6. A white-tailed deer takes 2 to 3 years to reach full size. And even then, a mature wild deer has far less meat-to-bone ratio than a cow bred for that purpose over thousands of years. So you're waiting longer, feeding it a complicated diet, and getting less at the end. The math is brutal, and it gets worse. Here is the third problem, and this one is personal. To domesticate an animal, it has to be comfortable being near you, not just tolerant, calm, relaxed, indifferent to your presence. Cows, sheep, and pigs have what biologists call a low flight response. You can walk into a field of cows, and most of them will just look at you and keep chewing. Now, walk into a field of deer. A twig snaps, and every single one of them is gone in under 2 seconds. Deer are, by evolutionary design, one of the most panic-wired animals on Earth. Their entire survival strategy is flee first, think later. Their heart rate spikes at the slightest unfamiliar sound. In captivity, this is catastrophic. When a deer panics in a pen, it doesn't slow down and look for an exit. It throws itself at walls. It breaks its own legs. It drives its head into fences with enough force to break its own neck. There is a documented condition called capture myopathy. It happens when a wild deer is restrained or stressed suddenly. The muscle fibers literally destroy themselves from the inside. The deer can die hours or days later with no external injury, no visible wound, just dead from fear. This is not a trainable problem. This is not something you solve by being nicer or quieter around them. It is baked into their DNA at a level that 10,000 years of selective breeding never managed to undo. Which leads to the fourth problem: breeding. To domesticate an animal, you need to be able to control when and how it reproduces. You need to be able to decide which males breed with which females. You need predictable, manageable reproduction. Deer do not cooperate. Male deer, bucks, enter a state called the rut every autumn. During the rut, a buck becomes almost entirely different animal: aggressive, unpredictable, territorial. A rutting buck will charge anything it perceives as a rival, including humans, including walls, including its own reflection. Even deer that have been raised in captivity from birth have attacked and killed their handlers during rut season. This happens every year at wildlife reserves and deer farms. A 200-pound buck with a full rack of antlers is not something you manage with a rope. You cannot put a harness on that. You cannot breed that safely. So you have an animal that's expensive to feed, slow to grow, terrified of you, and seasonally lethal. But here's what's fascinating. Even after all of that, humans tried. Of course we did. There are scattered records from ancient China, medieval Europe, and indigenous communities across North America of humans attempting to keep deer in enclosures. Some even partially succeeded for a time. In parts of ancient China, deer were kept in royal game parks for centuries. In medieval Europe, deer were enclosed in large hunting reserves called deer parks, some of which covered thousands of acres. But these were never true domestication. The deer were never tamed. They were just temporarily contained. The moment the fence came down, they were wild again, within one generation, every time. Because domestication is not about trapping an animal, it is about changing what an animal is. True domestication rewires the animal's psychology across generations. It selects for offspring that are calmer, more curious about humans, less reactive. And that process for deer never took hold. The wildness kept snapping back. So now think about what did make it. Think about the cow. The cow descends from a wild animal called the aurochs. The aurochs was enormous, 6 feet tall at the shoulder, long curving horns, genuinely dangerous. Julius Caesar described them as barely inferior to elephants in size. And yet, around 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, humans domesticated them. Why? Because aurochs, despite being dangerous, had something deer don't. They were herd animals with a dominance hierarchy, a clear social structure, alpha animals, beta animals, a chain of command. And when humans inserted themselves into that hierarchy, the whole herd followed. You dominate the led animal, and the rest defer to you automatically. That is the secret. Herd animals with dominance hierarchies are pre-wired for leadership. They are already designed to follow someone. Humans just had to convince them that someone was us. Deer don't have that. Deer are not a hierarchical herd species in the same way. They don't have the same social structure to hack. There's no dominance chain to insert yourself into, which is why when you approach a deer, it doesn't think, is this thing above me or below me in the hierarchy? It thinks one thing only: predator. Run. And here's the moment where this stops being about deer. Because here's the real question. The question underneath the question, why do we assume that we domesticated animals? In a very real sense, the animals that were domesticable domesticated themselves. The ones that could tolerate humans naturally drifted toward human settlements. Human camps meant food scraps. Food scraps meant survival. Over thousands of years, the calm ones survived. The panicky ones ran. And the calm ones bred with each other. And their offspring were calmer still. The animals that we think of as domestic, the ones we call ours, are the ones whose ancestors made a choice. A genetic, generational, slow motion choice. To trust us. The deer never made that choice. And they are still wild today. Every single one of them. 13 million white-tailed deer in North America alone. Thriving. Everywhere. Completely undomesticated. After 12,000 years of humans trying. And this is the part that should stop you cold. Because what does it say about us? We are the most powerful species this planet has ever produced. We have reshaped rivers. We have moved mountains. We have edited our own DNA. And yet we couldn't convince a deer to trust us. Not in 12,000 years. There are things in this world, in nature, in people, in ourselves, that cannot be forced into compliance. That snap back to wildness the moment the pressure lifts. And maybe the deer isn't a failure of domestication. Maybe the deer is a reminder. That wildness is not a flaw. It is a strategy. It is a 200-pound survival engine that has been running perfectly for millions of years. And the fact that it never needed us is not a gap in history. It is the point. The cow chose comfort. The deer chose freedom. And every morning when you hear one in the woods and it disappears before you can even focus your eyes, that's not an animal failing to be tame. That's an animal winning.